Yeah, good morning. So anyway, right. So so we will start today. I think I told you last session that we will have some kind of an insight into the the governance principles, which are known as the BIS principles or the Bank for International Settlement. And let's go through the background of it now. Up to now, we have learned uh, in our this module, the second module about the corporate governance. Then we have identified the objectives of the corporate governance. Then then we went in through the definition. We found the best definition given by OECD. There is a set of relationships uh, that sort of maintain among the stakeholders. So we went through the details, and then we identified what are the rights, obligations, how this concept can be brought into the governance practical environment. Then I think we went through the different types of the board structures, unitary and the dual or the two tier. Then we discussed about how to monitor the corporate governance. Then I think we slightly touch uh, on the Sharia supervision board, then different structures, the matrix structure, the silo structures. Then we discussed about the independence of the board and different verticals like risk, audit, compliance. Then we discuss in detail the audit contribution to the governance. Then we touched upon on the risk contribution to the governance. Uh, and with that, I think we have come to the basically the final stage where we are today going to discuss. Actually, this is not included in your syllabus uh, directly, but I thought I must give a little bit of insights into this. Uh, Now, you take the governance principles all around the world, including Sri Lanka. Most of those governance principles are stemming from the Basel Committee. Now, Basel Committee and the BIS, there's lots of interconnection. BIS, widely known as BIS, it is the Bank for International Settlement. I think this organization called the Bank for International Settlement, that was commenced as way back in 1930s, and there are a large number of countries who are full members. Uh, so the purpose of the BIS is to support. Actually, it can be considered as the bank of central banks, right? So, but this is basically on the governance part and how to do it. So, the BIS supports central banks to pursuit in of their monetary and the financial stability through international cooperation, and also it acts as a bank of central bank. So this is basically the BIS is all about, the large scope that they cover. Then we'll try to go through, and it has gone through, rather looked at the entire banking system of the world, and uh, its role is to make sure to support the central banks of the world, different countries, to maintain the monetary and the financial stability, right? And by setting the framework and also through international cooperation. So they are, passing on information, giving instruction, rather the recommendations based on which the governance requirements all around the world have been framed. Now, in view of the financial intermediation, right, we understood that the role of the bank in an economy is very important, right? I think we discussed this. So the public and the market, has lots of confidence, or the banks need to function in such a way that they win the confidence of the public and the market, because their activities of the banks are of very high sensitivity, right? Because if they don't do their function properly, that can trigger shock waves throughout the entire economy that we discuss, right? Going into the very basics, how the banks operate. They are using the customer deposits as their main, to finance their loan book, which is the largest asset of the bank. And therefore, you have to maintain your confidence, the public confidence, and do your business in such a way that you develop the public confidence and the trust. When I say public, it includes the market also, right? So therefore, corporate governance is thus of very great relevance both to the individual banking and also to the international financial system as a whole, right? Because we talked about the contagion effect. Then we understood, and we identified that there are lots of connections between the financial institutions throughout the globe, within the country, even outside. So when one bank is affected or one particular system is affected, that can affect the entire economy of that country. Not only that, it can even go outside the jurisdiction, can affect the rest of the world economy also. So therefore, the Basel Committee, which is a kind of a process arm of the BIS, that focus mainly on the banking supervision. And therefore, it has a very long-standing commitment to promote sound corporate governance practices for the banking community or the banking organizations, right? So, from time to time, they have reviewed, it's kept on reviewing based on what's happening in the market, taking different, environmental changes or the economic landscaping that take place in the market. So it has continuously reviewed. So then I think somewhere in 2006, they drew from the principles of the, I think we have discussed about the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So they had a set of information or other recommendations. So based on it, the Basel Committee in 2006, they drew up certain principles on the corporate governance. So with that, in 2006, the principles targeted the key issues of corporate governance. The main issues of the board. What they found is the board should be appropriately involved in approving the bank strategy. Right? So this is, we discussed when we discussed about the board, we discussed. It's the responsibility of the board to approve the strategy, or other formulation is basically in practice done by the management, but it is a board document. Board has to approve the strategy. Board has to approve the policies. We learned this, right? So this committee felt it is one key areas or issues that needs to be covered under governance, corporate governance, is that the board should be appropriately involved themselves in approving the bank strategy, right? Then we discuss, I think what we have discussed, we are now connecting with the theory now, okay? Because we are having little, time. Now, the clear lines of responsibilities, we understood, I think we discussed, should be framed in the entire banking organization. So it is starting from the board. right? So anybody who's working in the bank, there has to be a responsibility. With the responsibility, there should be authority, responsibility, and an obligation to deliver, right? So the clear lines of responsibility should be set and enforced throughout the organization. That's another key area where the Basel Committee felt in line with the corporate governance, what they should have. Then the compensation policies, right? It should be consistent with the bank's long-term objective, right? If I remember right, I think I mentioned this. So during the one of the reasons for the financial crisis that triggered in the 2006-7, one reason was the high compensation packages enjoyed by the top management, right? So therefore, the Basel Committee felt that there has to be compensation policies that should be consistent with the bank long-term objective, right? Then it focus on the risk management also. The risk generated by operations, right, needs to be very clearly identified and monitored because banking itself is taking risk, right? Then the Basel felt when designing the corporate governance principles, they felt that this is another area where they have to, have focus to have the risk generated by various business operations and through various process verticals and the businesses needs to be very clearly monitored, and that has to be done in a very, very transparent manner, right? There should be transparency and it should be adequately managed. Then, as I told you, now by 2007, the entire world went through the financial crisis, right? Then they found the number of corporate governance failures and lapses that had happened had triggered or rather had paved the way or had facilitated the so-called financial crisis. So, such including among the lapses that they identified, what they found was the board oversight had been lacking, or it is basically the insufficient board oversight of the entire business operation, especially on the functions of the corporate management, has led to this, the so-called financial crisis. Because the corporate management had been playing or rather carrying on business in a way according to their whims and fancies. And there hadn't been, good policy structures brought into the or rather placed within the banking system. So therefore, they had their own ways of doing things, which really, hit the stability of the banking system. So therefore, they found that the board oversight had been lacking or had been insufficient on the senior management. And also they found the inadequate risk management also had led to such issues in the banking industry. And also they found the structures, the banking organization structures, right? Then some structures are unduly complex, right? The structures of the bank also have led to that type of failures. So therefore, they felt it's important to pay due focus on those areas as well. And having these experiences or the observations, right, the committee decided to revisit this after the financial crisis, probably after 2006-7. They revisited it, what they had, and having reviewed, the committee reaffirmed their continued relevance and the critical importance of their adoption by the bank. The areas that we discussed, they reaffirm that the banks need to really adopt these concepts and bring in their controls and have those the good practices implemented or brought into the banking business. And also, they felt that the supervisors or the banking regulators need to ensure that these good practices are being followed by the bank as duly framed. Now, this is an evolvement of series of activities or the processes which really led the banking system today to follow the present corporate governance principles. So, with that, in a summary, what they felt was the board oversight or the board practices, then the activities of the senior management and how the senior management should be entrusted with the task, how the senior management compensation needs to be paid. Now you need to connect all this to what we learned, right? Now we are basically trying to understand the theory which led the present practices to be put in place. Now, in our lessons or the sessions that we have covered, we learned that there has to be policies, and the policy is a document that needs to be approved by the board. So therefore, it's treated as a board document, board approved document. The policies of the bank covering various areas, different business verticals, different disciplines, right? So the board has overall responsibility. So in summary, the board practices or the board responsibility, then the functions of the senior management and what type of oversight they should have on the senior management, and then about the risk controls, the risk management and the internal controls, which includes compliance and internal audit and various other, the first line or the primary controls or the first line of defenses that we discussed and talked about. Then about the compensation paid to the employees starting from the top management. Then about the banking structures, whether it's a complex or the opaque corporate structures that we are having. Based on it, you have to change and modify or rather to have your controls in proportion to those. And finally, they identified the area of disclosure and transparency. So after the bad experiences the world has due to the last financial crisis, they revisited this and then again came up and reaffirmed the importance of putting these requirements into practice without any change or without any deviations, because they felt it is extremely important to have a sound banking system. Right. Now, then we will try to discuss the key areas that we talked about now. The board practices. The board should actively carry out its overall responsibility or the supervisory function or the I mentioned to you, they are sitting on the top and having an aerial view of basically what's happening and setting the policies and the strategies. So the board should actively carry out its overall supervision or the responsibility of the bank, including its business and the risk strategy. So they should look at the business strategy, and also they should look at the operational and the risk strategy. How you have the business strategy from one side, then from the other side you have the risk and the operational strategies, how you get to those business targets by having good internal controls, procedures, practices, and risk culture. The compliance and the audit also being part of it, right? Through which the financial soundness and the stability and good governance can be established or created. So that's the board responsibility. Then in addition to that, the board should also provide effective oversight of the senior management. So they should exercise sound objective judgment and have the appropriate controls within the organization or covering all the business processes and the business verticals and the business discipline. The processes needs to be there. In order to, or in the process of doing that, they need to follow the good governance practices, covering or rather focusing on the business operations, as well as it should have a coverage on its own function, the board self-assessment, whether the board had done their job properly. Then nobody else from outside is going to come and check that. The board has to carry on their own supervision about their self-assessment of what they are doing or what they are practicing or what they are preaching to practice by the people down the line, starting from the corporate management down the line. Then on the board also has a responsibility to see that they have deployed the right persons for the right job at the right time. Especially the board, I think, if you remember right, we discussed about 4 strategic committee or regulatory important committees, subcommittees: board risk committee, board audit committee, the board, the nomination committee, and the HRRC, human resource and remuneration committee. So through this, all the corporate management, all the KMPs, the key management personnel appointed needs to be approved by the board, or the board consent needs to be obtained. In doing that, they need to make sure that the people who are selected to run those positions do have their appropriate qualifications, the competence and the skills, and whether they can work properly, collectively as well as individually in delivering the task assigned to them. So that's the board responsibility under good corporate governance. So you have the policies, then you set the policies, then you have look at the strategy, the business strategy, as well as you look at the operational risk controls and the inter procedures. Then you look at the people who are supposed to or are the requested or required to run those functions on behalf of the board, and seeing whether they are right people have been hired for the right position, looking at their qualifications, competencies, then your exposure, skills, everything. So, therefore, it needs to be supported by the competent, robust, and independent risk control function, which needs to be overseen or supervised by the board. Right. So when you come to the senior management, Senior management should basically have their due qualifications and they should get themselves cleared on as uh, proprietary fit and proper. That clearance has to be obtained from the regulator, right? And therefore, with the senior management needs to, under the direction or the supervision of the board, they should ensure that the bank's operations, the activities are consistent or being carried out in consistent with the business strategy of the bank. That is the responsibility of the senior management. When I say senior management, I am referring to the corporate management, right? So they need to make sure that the functions assigned to them are carried out keeping in line with the board policies and it is aligned to the board approved business strategy. Not only that, they should ensure that it is done in accordance with the risk appetite or the risk tolerance and the various risk and control policies approved by the board. Now see the connection, right? So the practical side we have already discussed. Now I'm touching little on the theory side, how these practices came into practice, or how the present procedures or the practices that we have been invented or have been established or brought into the banking system. These are basically the BIS, starting from the BIS principles and which came through the Basel committees. Then we focus on the risk management and the internal controls. When you say we, the committee felt this is another area, risk management and internal control. So the bank should have an independent risk function. We discussed having a CRO, Chief Risk Officer, who is competent and who has the skills, who knows his job, and he needs to be duly authorized, empowered to carry out his job in an independent manner. That's why the reporting line is always directed to the board subcommittee and not to the MD CEO or the internally. The CRO is reporting, we discussed all this, reporting direct to the board subcommittee chair, risk management, BIRMC chair, right? And that he has the outlook or the stature to carry out that function. So it's not only the risk, it is for the internal audit as well as for compliance. So whether they are people of the right stature, having that personality, having that the experience, the maturity, having that knowledge, the skills, the competencies to run this function. That's why the compliance or the risk management has become very expensive but at the same time very important today. That's why those positions are given that independence, where no other person in the bank has that authority to work directly with the board or having a direct reporting line to the board. Nobody else. These three officers had direct reporting line to board in addition to the MDCU. The reason is the importance of the job function that they carry out. Right? So therefore, they have to be the people of the sufficient knowledge, expertise, the maturity, different skills we discuss in detail, the knowledge, the communication skills, both written, oral, negotiation skills, listening skills, analytical skills. When we, in our first module, when we discuss about the role of the compliance officer, we discuss all that. All this is because the international recommendations are there for these officers to be of this competent levels. The failure of which will expose the bank to various risk and, contingency, embarrassment, difficult situation. When you talk about the risk management, it should be identified and monitored on an ongoing basis, covering the entire business operation, right? And it has to be in line with the bank's, the business model, the type of products that we have put in or rather introduced. And also, it needs to look at the internal control structures, right? So I told you, the risk, compliance, and audit, these are interconnected functions, the second line and the third lines of defenses. I told you the cooperation that these three units should have among themselves. So if due cooperation is not there, it will definitely be an hindrance to ensuring that there's a sound bank that's in operation. In other words, it can affect the soundness of and the stability of the bank. So therefore, these three watchdogs, the defense lines, needs to function very effectively and efficiently. And now that we are focusing on the risk function under governance, right, it should always keep an eye on the internal control infrastructure. And also, it should keep an eye on what's happening around in the market. The business changes, the environmental changes, the regulatory changes, the changes taking place in the market. Basically, it should have a very clear focus and attention to detail on internal as well as external risk landscape that affects the bank. Then we are discussing about the compensation. So we have discussed this. Just to touch a little bit deep into it, all the compensation packages of the KMPs needs to be approved by the HRRC board subcommittee. Hiring, firing, or rather terminating the services of the KMPs has to have the consent of the board subcommittee. The packages or the salary and other benefits to be paid to them, the compensation package as a whole, needs to be approved by the board. So therefore, the bank should fully implement these policies. And in many other countries, in Sri Lanka, other than Sri Lanka, there's a forum called the FSB. It's known as the Financial Stability Forum. So it has, certain principles which have been framed for sound compensation payment practices, which is again called as the FSB principles, Financial Stability Forum principles on the compensation. So you don't have to be too much worried about this for this particular examination, right? So that is the forum that has created and rather set the tone and the framework for the present compensation, the requirement of the board to have an overall oversee the compensation packages that's to be awarded or paid to the senior management and down the line as well. Of course, they are not going to look at the payments made to the junior people in the bank. At least the corporate management payments are being overseen seen by the board because of this international best practice. Then the corporate structures of the bank. What is the type of the structure we have? So is it a very a complex metric structure, or do we have a silo system? There's one bank just doing one business in one country, or is it a bank that has coming under a large business conglomerate? Whether we have different arms, business arms, like the bank assurance, like it can be another investment type of a arm. So you can have different types. So the depending on the metrics or the structure of your organization, that also needs to be given due focus, because what's happening if you function as a parent body or the main controlling body, the functions of your affiliates and the subsidiaries or other connected business arms can also affect the soundness of the parent. So therefore, if that's the case, the board needs to have a clear idea of as to what the business structure, the corporate structure, whether it's a complex or a opaque corporate structure, or this is somewhat different. So they need to have this understanding of the structure of the bank, and then bring their policies and the controls, or rather give directions to the KMPs, the corporate management, to carry on business, taking those things into consideration. Because the more complex the structure is, more complex the controls need to be. So the board has to have an idea of this. The senior management has an idea of this. So therefore, the senior management and the board, KMPs and the board, should understand the purpose of the having this type of structures. As a result, whether it could impede the transparency, whether it could impede the compliance statuses of the various the business units functioning under your bank or is your bank itself, and they need to be aware of, therefore need to be aware of the special risks that could arise due to those complex structural framework of your bank, if that's the case. Then finally, it is on the disclosure and the transparency. It is basically on the disclosure and the transparency. All this we have learned in our previous sessions. Now we are connecting this. Why that disclosure has become so important, or where does this come from? This disclosure requirement, the transparency requirement. Now you understand what we learned as by having in the bank are stemming from certain principles, international best practices, principles like the Basel Committee, the BIS principles, then maybe the OECD practices. So there are so many international best practices and recommendations that are the base or the foundation for what we are practicing today in our banks on a day-to-day business. So the disclosure and transparency is an important tool to help and emphasize and also to implement the key principles that we discussed in connection with good governance. Right? We discussed many principles. So if you have the disclosure and the transparency, that will make sure that those the previously discussed principles are duly being done because you are transparent. Where the world can see whether it's happening, or if it's done covered with an iron curtain, then others can't see. So then, therefore, there can be deviations, violations. But when you have the transparency and various disclosure requirements in place, you have to publish those information. So the carry out the business in a transparent manner so the others can also see. This is done by way of various publication of your annual account, publication of your quarterly account, publication of your half yearly account. Then in the annual report, it's a full disclosure. You tell how your business is run, what's the strategy, what are the key initiatives you took, what are the initiatives you are trying to take for the future. Then you have separate governance report, separate risk report, separate compliance report, separate audit confirmation, and the board confirmation on the internal controls. Then, since of late, we have a section called the CAM, Key Audit Matters, being published in the annual report. What the external auditors feel as very important findings, like you call them CAMs, Key Audit Matters, also needs to be published. Then going forward, any penalty that were levied also needs to be published. So these are the disclosure and the transparency requirements. So with that, the business is carried out or carrying on, business being carried on with this sound corporate governance principles backing it, or you are sitting on those sound corporate governance principles so that you carry on your business in the bank and in a sound manner, or which will end up as the ensure the soundness and the stability of the bank. Right. But having said this, the international best practice of the Basel or the BIS, they assist to enhance the corporate governance framework, and also they assist the regulators. There are another set of recommendations they have for the regulators. Now, what we are going to discuss are basically mainly focusing on the banking operation. But they have lots of other recommendations covering AML/CFT, covering financial reporting, then covering the regulatory part. There are so many other regulations and the recommendations and the are issued by the BIS and the Basel and all that. But what we are now focusing on the banking operations and the in order to do business in a so that the bank soundness and the stability will be ensured. So when these recommendations are being put into practice, it has to be done. This is important. Should be proportionate to the size, to the complexity of the business and the business structure, then the economic significance, the growth objectives, rather the economic significance and the risk profiles of the bank and also the group. Because if now today we are all doing everything on a risk-based approach, looking at the risk, based on the risk. So the principles and the practices that we learned or the recommendations need to be proportionate to the risk profile of the bank, proportionate to the structure of the bank, proportionate to the complexity of the business operation of the bank. And also it should look at or have a focus on the economic significance that can or that's connected to that particular area that you are uh, monitoring or governing. So that's how the international best practices are coming into play. So it's important when carrying on your compliance function or the risk function or maybe the business function, right? So you need to make sure that the corporate governance standards or these requirements are expected to be pursued in a manner consistent with the applicable environmental happenings. Or in other words, in addition to the size of the complexity and the sensitivity of your business operation, also you should look at the laws and the regulations of that particular jurisdiction, the country, and various business and the ethical codes that may have been implemented by the regulators and the authorities. So therefore, when the committee brought in this and also said that the application needs to be in proportionate to what you find in the ground level realities, therefore the supervisors or the regulators are encouraged to check on the framework and also the standards, the practices followed by the bank, and to make sure that the standards are consistent with the relevant committee guidance. That is why the regulators do visit your bank on a regular basis, and basically go through all this. If you are in compliance, you will know what type of insights they have in the supervisory the examination that they carry out. If you had that opportunity to get into the practical areas, you will understand what I am saying better. They come, they ask for your policies, then they see whether those policies have been approved by the board. Then they see whether the policy adequately covers the area or whether it's robust enough or whether it's lacking in something, whether it has been duly reviewed based on the changes that are happening in the market, in the regulatory systems, in the business practices, and whether there are procedures to meet those. All this we learned in our previous session, how this is done practically. Now we are looking at from a different angle or a corner, why those practices are in place now. What really made them to be in place? That's what we are now looking at. So the supervisor or the regulators also need to do a certain function in order to come and they need to encourage the banks to periodically check their framework, check their policies, check their procedures, and check their operational standards to be consistent with the international best practices or the committee guideline. Right. Then also this committee, it has recognized that there can be, differences in the legislative and the regulatory framework across the globe. All countries will not have the same framework, same regulatory system, same legislation. The committee has understood and they have recognized this. Because if you remember right, we have different types of boards, two-tier boards, single-tier boards, complex structures, opaque structures, the silo systems, right? So the board has recognized this. When I say board, the committees have recognized this, and they have allowed or rather uh, encouraged different banks in the different countries to take those factors, and also the regulators of different countries to take those factors also into account in regulating without trying to, you know, to 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 plant or paste a, a print of exactly what they have recommended. No, take that as a base, and then to to implement them in proportionate with the environment in which you are, or the happenings in the environment in which you are, or the complexities or the simplicity of the business operations in which you are. So it has to be in proportionate to suit the ground level realities. Okay. Then I have shared yesterday, few slides, because last time I uh, agreed, or rather I told you that I'll give you some insights into the various BIS principles which enhances the corporate governance. So if you go through that, the principle one is say the board has the overall responsibility. Now, what we are seeing in these principles are all what we have learned up to now, right? And in the first session, or rather up to now, the today's session, so I discuss many areas which are stemming from these principles, right? So if you go through these principles, we'll try to run through these principles now, then you will understand what is felt in this principle is what we have learned, is what we see in our the practical environment, or it is what we are ought to have in our practical environment if we don't have them now, right? So the principle one says the board has overall responsibility for the bank, including approving and overseeing the implementation of the bank's strategic objectives, risk strategy, corporate governance, and the corporate values. The board is also responsible for providing oversight of senior management. So this is what we discuss throughout in our sessions under governance, and also up to now, from 9 to now, I went through, I gave you an insight into it. So you see, the principle number one, how uh, good it is connecting or it's appropriate to what we learn. The board has overall responsibility for the bank, including approving and overseeing the implementation of the bank's strategic objectives, risk strategy, corporate governance, and corporate values. The board is also responsible for providing oversight of senior management. So this we have learned. There's absolutely nothing new, but now you see the principle. Then the principle two, board members should be and remain qualified, including thorough training for their positions. They should have a clear understanding of their role in corporate governance and be able to exercise sound and objective judgment about the affairs of the bank. Right? So this also we have discussed in detail. What does this principle 2 say? The board members should be and remain qualified. So they need to be qualified people. They need to be people with knowledge, people with skills, people with the competence in different disciplines and the different fields. right? That's why, in addition to the shareholding directors, you bring independent directors to your board to support and strengthen your board, to reinforce your board with people with expertise, knowledge, and the skills to direct the bank, direct the organization in the right path, assisting them in framing their strategies, assisting them in implementing those strategies, looking at through an aerial view. So they have to remain qualified, including thorough training. So they need to be trained. That's why we carry out induction program. If you remember right, I think we mentioned and we discussed, when the directors are appointed, you need to carry on rather conduct induction program for them to understand it. They may come with a particular specialty or the expertise in particular area. Probably they might not know the banking structure, how the banking business operates, how the corporate management, how the thing operates. So they need to be inducted and given, and so therefore that's part of training for their position. They should have a clear understanding of their role in the corporate governance. And in the induction program, you tell them this is your role. Now, say you hire a director who is an engineer by profession, who brings you the specialty in, the expertise in engineering, because you are financing large projects. It can be civil, or it can be mechanical, or it can be various investments that you make. So that expertise we may need. So he's an engineer. He may know his stuff. He may know his onions, but he may not know this. But then through this training, you need to make him understand the environment in which he is going to play, what are his responsibilities, what are his obligations, and how he should direct the bank, that type of information. Clear understanding of their role in corporate governance, and be able to exercise sound and objective judgment about the affairs of the bank. Right? So that through training, you tell these experts who come from different business disciplines as to what their role is, and make them able to exercise sound and objective judgment relates to the affairs of the bank. Right. Then the principle number 3, it says the board should define appropriate governance practices for its own work and have in place the means to ensure such practices are followed and periodically reviewed for improvement. What does this say? There is absolutely nothing new. We have learned all this in our previous sessions. The board should define appropriate governance practices. They must define and say how the business needs to be governed. That's they do by bringing the policies, giving the necessary instructions and the direction as to how the business needs to be operated for his own work, and to have in place means to ensure such practices are followed and periodically reviewed. So they have to, board need to define appropriate governance practices for its own work. That is for the board itself. That's where the self-evaluation system of various board and the board subcommittees have come into practice. So they need to make their self-evaluation to see how successful have they been in delivering their task of overseeing the supervision, leading from the top kind of an exercise. So in addition to that, they need to have in place the means to ensure such practices are followed and periodically reviewed for improvement. Right? Down the line, the people, the bank, whether the practices followed by them are duly being periodically and duly being reviewed by the board is very important, because if you do that only, that will happen in an effective manner. That's the principle 3. Then the principle 4. In a group structure, the board of the parent company has the overall responsibility for adequate corporate governance across the group and ensuring that there are governance policies and the mechanisms appropriate to structure business and the risk of the group and its entities. So if it's a group structure where you are a parent company or whether you are a subsidiary of a parent company, right? The board of the parent company has the overall responsibility to ensure that the subsidiaries or the affiliates or the other arms that are being controlled by them are also doing their business in a in a in the given manner, so that there aren't any additional risks that could arise or stem, because if something happens down the line, that affects the parent company. So similarly, if you are playing as a subsidiary player or a affiliate company, then you need to do your business in such a way that you fall in line with the group requirement. It works both ways. When you're in compliance, you need to make sure that if you are a parent company, that all the subsidiaries and the affiliated bodies of your organization are also doing their business in a compliant manner, because are practicing their risk functions as per the risk appetite. Because if anything goes wrong there, if it's a systemically important subsidiary, that can always come and affect the main or the parent body. The other way around, parent company, if you are a member of the parent company, you need to make sure that all your subsidiaries are falling in line with your group strategy, group corporate strategy, group business strategy. Because any deviation or loopholes or the shortcomings at the lower level, or the affiliate company or the subsidiary level, can in turn affect the group performance and the group stability. Then principle 5, under the direction of the board, senior management should ensure that the bank's activities are consistent with the business strategy, risk tolerance, appetite, and policies approved by the board. So under the direction of the board, senior management should ensure. Now this is requiring the senior management to follow the guidance or the instructions given by the board to make sure and ensure that the business activities are, or the operational activities are consistent with the business strategy of the bank, are consistent with the risk, approved risk levels of the bank by way of the risk appetite document or by way of the risk tolerances established. Principle number 6, bank should have an independent risk management function, including a chief risk officer or equivalent, with sufficient authority, stature, independence, resources, and access to the board. We discussed this in detail, right? So, though the principle 6 covers the risk office only, right, through various other best practices, the compliance and the audit also have to play in the same manner, so that they are also given the sufficient authority, they are also having the due stature, they are also given that independence, and they are also given those resources, and they are also given the access to information, and also access to the board, to carry out their business in an efficient and effective manner, and also in a robust manner, so that uh, it's done properly as per the guidelines or the international best practices. Then the principal seven, risk should be identified and monitored on an ongoing firm-wide and individual entity basis. What does it say? Risk is an ongoing exercise. Compliance is an ongoing exercise. Audit is an ongoing exercise, which should cover the entire firm or the entire bank, and also the group, if it's a group level. And the sophistication of the bank risk management and the internal control infrastructure should keep pace with any changes in the bank risk profile, including its growth and to the external risk landscape. So what does this say? The sophistication of the bank risk management function. When you say the risk management function, here, taking that international, looking at from the international perspective, compliance function is already within that. Audit function is also already within that. So what does it say? Uh, the sophistication of the bank risk management and the internal control infrastructure should keep pace. So basically your internal the risk management structure or the sophistication of that should keep pace. It should go in proportion with any changes to the bank risk profile and to the external risk landscape. Right. And the principle 8, effective risk management requires robust internal communication within the bank about risk, both across the organization and through reporting to the board and the senior manager. This is all about risk communication. Risk communication. So the effective risk management requires robust international communication. So you need to communicate it among the stakeholders, right? You have to do this communication across the entity or the organization, right? And also by bringing it to the notice of the senior management for the due correction, and then bring it to the notice of the board so that the board knows whether there are any regulatory issues or controls governing issues that have been imposed, so that that can affect the good governance or the corporate governance. Principle 9. The board and the senior management should effectively utilize the work conducted by internal audit function, external auditors, and the internal control function. So what does this say? The board and the senior management should effectively utilize. So they need to review, they need to go through, they need to use the information MI generated through various, audit and the risk functions carried out by internal auditors, external auditors, internal risk professionals, and also the findings on the internal controls. They need to duly make use of this in carrying on their business. Principle 10. The board should actively oversee the compensation systems design and operation, and should monitor and review the compensation system to ensure that it operates as intended. So here, it is through which that we discuss based on this, that the impact or the importance of looking at the compensation as a key area which merits the attention of the board. So therefore, compensation, including payments and including hiring, needs to be given the due focus by the board so that that will not affect the financial stability and the soundness of the bank, because you are giving them the right compensation package, not more, not less, but the right package, and encouraging them to deliver their part so that it can finally or adversely impact the bank which is governed by that particular board or which is being pioneered by the corporate manager. Then principle number 11, an employee compensation should be effectively aligned with the prudent risk taking. Compensation should be adjusted for all types of risk. Compensation outcomes should be symmetric with the risk outcomes. Compensation payout schedules should be sensitive to the time horizon of the risk, and the mix of cash, equity, and other forms of compensation should be consistent with the risk alignment. So that again relates to the compensation, the oversight by the board, or the importance of compensation in terms of the BIS principle, that it has to be effectively aligned with the prudent risk taking. Then number 12, the board and the senior management should know and understand the bank's operational structure and the risk that it possesses. So you need to understand the structure, you need to understand the business, you need to understand the structure, you need to understand the other all connected business environment. That only will help you to carry out your job in a professional manner. Then principle number 13, where a bank operates through special purpose or related structures or in jurisdictions that impede transparency or do not meet international banking standards, its board and the senior management should understand the purpose, structure, and the unique risk of these operations. They should also seek to mitigate the risk identified. So what it says is, if a bank happens to operate through special purposes, there are different specialized or special functions. You call it the having a special purpose vehicle in management. So if the need is there for the bank to operate through special purpose or to have a particular structure or to operate in a particular jurisdiction where the transparency is impeded or compromised, or if they are not following the international best practices or deviating or ignoring, the board and the KMPs should understand as to why you are supposed to do this or you are compelled to do this. Therefore, you need to understand the purpose, why it is done, and the structure that you are using, and what are the type of risks that can arise by engaging or doing such a business, so that you know exactly what you are doing and what could be the possible risk, or it's to be looked upon as a prudent kind of a more known kind of a risk rather than meeting or experiencing surprises. You know the 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 wicket in which that you are playing is a wet wicket. It's more slippery. You can fall. So all that needs to be understood by the board based on the business requirements, and the rest of the board needs to approve and agree on it if that is to be allowed. Then the principle number 14, the governance of the bank should be adequately transparent to its stakeholders, shareholders, or the stakeholders, which means the shareholders, depositors, and other relevant stakeholders and the market participants. That is why those disclosure requirements are established. That is why those are in place. That is why the financials are disclosed. That is why various other KMPs are disclosed. That is why you give all the key information about your business in the annual report so that the entire world can know about your background, know about your human capital, know about your corporate management, know about your directors, know about your financial stability, know about your liquidity, so on and so forth. So there's no transparency that every stakeholder has an opportunity to see what's going on, because if for whatever the reason if it fails, that's if it's a systemic important bank, that can trigger shock waves to the entire economy and the industry. Right. So I think now we have basically covered the theoretical part of governance in a nutshell. This is a vast area, very large area, right? So these guidelines, different books put it in a different way, and these guidelines are not things that are carved in stones. These are changing, ever changing, being modified, being reviewed, right? So, but the the underlying concepts don't change, they remain the same. Learned about the board's overall responsibility, the qualifications, and the various other expertise the board needs to have, and the type of responsibilities they are carrying on. Then the structure of the board, the practices of the board. Then we discuss about the senior management, their functions, their compensation packages. Then the how to govern the group structures, the importance of doing it, what are the areas that we have to look at. Then we discuss in detail about the compliance function. We discuss about the risk function, audit function, how the risk management function works, right? In broad sense, compliance and internal audit, they are also being part and parcel of those. Then the how to identify, monitor, communication, how you communicate your risk, at which level, internal risk, the board compliance function, the internal audit function. Then also we discuss about the compensation, the importance of the paying compensation in fact about the role of the supervisor, and also we touch. So with that, I think you have what corporate governance is, how these corporate governance requirements have come into practice, come into play, what are the foundations or what are the recommendations on which these have been built up, and how are we practicing them, how are we uh, applying them? How are you adopting them? It has to be in proportion to your internal structure, the complexity or the simplicity or the different products. So that all that we have defined. Right. I think it's the time for you to make your clarifications or seek your present your questions and seek the due clarifications for the gray areas if there are any on this subject that we have covered. Any questions? Any questions, please? Am I being heard? Or have I just spoken to, without an audience? Do you all hear me?
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir. We can
Hello.
hear you.
Yeah. So this is the
Hello.
time for to clarify your doubts, students. So I think we have by now we have covered our given syllabus area. I think I have covered more than what is spelled in the syllabus outline. So it's up to you to raise your questions or the doubts and get them clarified. No questions?
It's a small problem. One thing that when the directors are appointed,
Yeah.
uh, uh, who should monitor that their capabilities, like what areas they are coming, and then it's capable to handling the banking operation on about a bank. I'm telling.
Yeah.
So then only that we have to identify them and then give the induction as well. So who should do that?
Now you are Susil, right?
Yes.
Yeah. From which bank are you, Susil?
NSB.
NSP. I think your question has two parts, the way I understood, right? Who should appoint the directors, and how do you know what their expertise are? Is that what you asked, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
That's how I grasped your question. Yeah. Now, any question you have, always go to the basics, go to the fundamentals, right? Now, the learnings we had through this course or in the session that you followed, research, can you remember we discussed about 4 regulatory committees, right, within the board? What are those? BIRMC, BAC, HRRC, and the nomination. So we touch on these functions of these committees. BIRSC, by virtue of the name there itself, they are looking at the risk, board integrated risk management. Board audit committee, looking at the audit side of it. Then the other two committee, regulatory committee, there are many other committees, but regulatory compulsion is there. Coming from the governance regulations, the board nomination committee. Now the board nomination committee is responsible to identify the directors to the board. And also they are responsible to identify the KMPs and identifying and appointing them to the board, which needs to be endorsed by the shareholders in the annual general meeting. Right? So the main responsibility in bringing the right persons, right people to the board of directors to represent the board, subject to the given number restrictions. The banking business, you can have 13 directors, right? So give me a second. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So I was talking about the board. The identification of the directors is responsibility of the nomination committee. So they basically do the necessary evaluation and identify the people who are required to represent the board, right? There are, I think, I discussed with you, you have, independent directors, non-independent directors. So the independent directors are basically the business experts that we, or the professional that we bring into the board, because they have no kind of a significant shareholding. They are being invited to serve in the board uh, by virtue of or by looking at the expertise that they have within them, so that the board or the company or the bank can benefit from the expertise of that director. They are called independent directors. Then other than non-independent directors are definitely representing the shareholding. If they have significant shares, they can vote and bring their representative as a director to the board. So they may have, in addition to that, they may also be experts in different business disciplines, right? So the question you ask is, who decides to appoint? The simple answer is the nomination committee recommends by evaluating different persons, screening them, and recommending them to the board to be appointed as directors. Then the board needs to agree and appoint them. Then it has to be rather endorsed at the annual general meeting also. Until then, he will run as a temporary director on a temporary basis until the endorsement is the shareholders endorse the appointment of the director. Right. Then based on it, now the practical side of providing induction is going to be a general, because you are not going to now say an expert in engineering comes into the board. So expert in maybe the law being brought into the board to serve as a director, right? You will give him that outline of how your business is operated, what is the structure in which this business is operated, and what are the products or the type of the businesses that we carry on, and what is the organizational structure, what is the status of the bank within the group. It is just a individual bank or whether it's a member of a group, whether the bank is the parent company. So all that information needs to be given to them through the induction, and tell how the banking system works, the basic information. Tell how your corporate management, who is handling which part, that type of induction is given by the corporate management. So you can liaise with the board secretary and the compliance, and that induction can be given. So have I answered your question, Susil? That is how practically it's done. Have I answered, or you have any further doubts on it?
It's okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? No,
In the government banking sector, is it a must to change the board and board of directors and the chairman when a political regime change?
no, it's like this. There's no need for the change in the political regime to change the directorate of the board. There's nothing like that. But the point is, if you know that in Sri Lanka, the big banks, in addition to the government banks, there are other private banks also where the government has a significant stakeholding by way of their investment through the EPF ETF. They have made their investments and they are having significant amount of shareholdings in the bank. So they have a certain amount of controlling power that is there. So in practice, what happens is when a regime changes or when the different political party comes into power with a change in the regime, these are systemically important banks, and probably they would. Now, I'm talking about the practical side of it. There are no hard and fast rule to say that you have to change. No, nothing. Right? So they make various appointments. Now, say a new CEO goes there, right? You do your changes to make sure that you set the tone and set your ground to play the game the way that you desire to do it, but keeping in line with the governance regulation, right? Now, any new person comes in even as a head or a CEO of the bank, he would want to come and make certain changes in the key positions because he would want the business because he has the vision and he's the main person who is responsible to carry on the business in order to meet the shareholder objectives or the bank given policies and the strategy and all that. So he brings in a new kind of a flavor. So he can decide where to do the changes and the appointment. I think your question was with a change in the government, is it a must? The technical answer is no, it's not a must. But the practical side, if they think, okay, by planting Mr. X instead of Y in this position would help to implement their the financial and the fiscal policies that is going to be more advantageous, they might ask the existing person because if the present person is also politically appointed or appointed in that manner, might ask them to resign and the new person will be appointed. So it's not a must, but in practice it can happen, right? So it's not only sorry.
Yes, sir. And excuse one more thing. Then can a newly appointed board can question the decisions taken and the approvals given by the previous board?
So it's in law there are things called the ultra virus of directors. You have learned the banking law, the law of contract and all. You see, ultra virus of directors means any action taken by them outside their authority levels. Ultra virus. Intra virus is action taken by them within their approved authority levels. Right. No matter who sits in the board is board. So the board has certain authority, board has certain responsibilities, board has certain obligations. So it is not a decisive factor or an important factor to know who sits in the board, right? The board can review its own decisions. Board can change the practices or the strategies because it's the board. Now, if the present board wants to question on something that has happened under the regime or the control of the previous board, first you need to look at it, whether it is ultra-virus or not. If it is ultra-virus, they have no authority to do so, then it becomes null and void. Right? So then it's questionable. You can question not only the previous board, anything that relates to or comes under their purview can be questioned. There's no issue. What matters or what is important for us to know here is whether it is ultra-virus or intravirus. Or in other words, whether it is done within their scope and the authority levels or outside the authority level. If they have done anything outside the authority levels, then of course, it not only it can be questioned, it can be dealt in terms of the laws that govern that particular area. Who asked that question? Who? Hema.
Hema. Yes.
Which bank are you from?
Which bank are you from, Hema? I'm from People's Bank.
People's Bank.
People's Bank.
Yeah. So these things happen.
So these things happen, Hema.
Have I answered your question?
Yes, and one more thing. Then, if a union or an employee or whatever the parties have problems about the decisions taken by the high authorities, I mean the board, to whom do they require to go for the ratification, for get a clarification on that? Is there any way of reporting channel?
The question is not very clear to me. Is it Hema speaking?
Yes, sir, yes. I mean, if an employee or a union or a party has a doubt on the decision or a decision taken by the board, do they have any channel to get clarification on that, or do they don't have any? The board is the supreme authority to take the decision.
Yes, board is the supreme authority because they are sitting on top. Do you hear me? I see my voice being duplicated. Are you having the disturbance same? Do you hear me properly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, what you can do is, can you switch your mics, switch off your mics other than the person who speaks? Right? When you are speaking, you can switch on your mic, otherwise keep the mic muted. Right. Can others all mute their mics? And the speaker can speak by switching on the mic, unmuting. So, answer to your question, Hemal, if board is definitely at the helm, they are the superior most, and they are basically appointed to look after the interests of the shareholders and also the stakeholders in large. Okay, so they are the people who are given the responsibility to run the business. So they sit on top. If anybody, not even staff member, any union or whatever it is, there's no importance of who the party who wants to make a complaint or to interested, they need to first know what exactly that they are questioning. Right? Then they need to have an understanding about whether it's intravirus or ultravirus. Right? Then the legal systems are there, countries, the legislations are there, right? Then they can, the regulators are there. If they have, these are the general ways. If they think there's a malpractice or a wrong practice done, the regulator is there. They are the people who supervise. You can probably refer to the regulator and ask. Or in addition, I mean, the countries, the governing laws are there. If somebody had done something ultra-virus, it becomes, it's not valid. There's no validity in it, ultra-virus, as per the law, right? So then it needs to be taken up at the judicial forum, if that's the case. can refer and go through the courts and then bring it to the notice of the judiciary, and then you can challenge it and see. And of course, the financial ombudsman is there. That is mainly for the customers to seek their rather present their grievances. If they are not happy with the type of treatment given by the bank on as a customer, they can go to the financial ombudsman. If any other stakeholder within the bank has an issue like that, one way of referring it to the regulator, so the regulator will take a call on it, or else then if it's anything to do with the board, then of course, then you have to see whether it's a ultra virus action. Then you can seek remedy under the legal system.
Thank you,
Have I
sir.
answered your question?
Yes, sir, clearly. Thank you very much, sir.
Any other questions? So if there are other questions, please ask. I think if there are no questions, we will wind up the sessions now. I have covered even more than what is spelled out there. So next will be our presentations, and you all are supposed to hand over your synopsis or the executive summary today. Within the course of the day, it has to be sent to the IBS cell. And you have one further week up. By next Sunday, you need to submit your PowerPoint presentations and also the full report on the topic given. Right? After that, probably, so next week we will not be having any classes. So lectures are over unless you have any other section covered by another lecturer left behind. Then that means if those are fully covered, you can check it IBSL. To my knowledge, it's all covered. So this is the final session, the last session we are going to have in terms of lectures. After that, it will be the presentations. So any questions once again? So everything is clear to you all? Everybody?
Sir, this is Randilu. I need a small clarification regarding the synopsis. Is it okay if I ask now?
Yes, you are most welcome.
Usually, I think the parameters, the what's the font we need to use and what sort of spacing has to be there. Is it applicable to synopsis as well as the main report, sir, or is it only for the main report?
No, for everything. For everything. That's easy to read when you keep the spacing in that way, easy to read, easy to grasp. That's why the content part, the synopsis should cover the broader outlook of what you are going to present or what your findings, right? The importance of the topic, then the areas you are going to cover and how important it is to the industry of banking, so that type of a thing, and the little bit of the summary, the cream of the content, right? So basically, to give a flavor of as to what you are going to present under the given topic, how significantly important it is to the bank, and what are the consequences. So it's generally an outcome. I mean, that is what is expected from the synopsis.
Hello, sir, Mano here.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes,
Sir, now synopsis. Now, according to the this guideline, it should be limited to 3 pages, 2 pages. Now, one it is little more than 2 pages.
That's okay. That's perfectly okay. But I don't want anything to be lesser than that, because for the simple reason is then because through practice I know it will not have adequate coverage. So having a little over than what is specified is definitely not a major issue for this examination. But when you are doing certain other examination, you need to stick to the specifications. Anything less or more will will lead to deduction of marks, but I'm not going to do it if it's longer. Lengthy, but don't make it too much long also, then, it's difficult to read all
Yes,
this.
yes.
So having it a slightly lengthier than what is specified is okay, no problem.
Other than now the PowerPoint presentations that this font size and the word type of the word is not applicable. No, I think because if we apply that is, then the PowerPoint presentation is gets too small.
No, I am not clear on what you're asking.
Now the in the PowerPoint presentations, the font size is that we can't
Font
stick to
size,
the
font size. No,
yeah font
that's up
size.
to you all. There's no problem.
Yeah.
No, PowerPoint font size is not applicable.
Okay. Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you.
That's the font size is applicable for the executive summary and the report. Huh? PowerPoint, you can have your own different, the styles. It can be italic or whatever it is. You don't have to be Times New Roman. All that's changed for the PowerPoint. No restriction.
So
Thank you,
this
sir.
is Darshana from
Yes,
hello
Darshan. Yeah, Darshan.
from group number 6. Small questions. The referencing must be Harvard style, is it?
Yes, yes, you are right.
And do we have to include the synopsis also in the report?
Yes, you do. You do have to. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
And everything, I need a cover page with your topic, group number, and the names of the participants with their photographs,
Okay.
right? And
Okay, sir.
if there are any, dead members within the group, and if they are not contributed, I think you are not supposed to bring their names into it because what we need is the people who have contributed only to be, mentioned there. Otherwise, you can say either they are absent or not contributed, whatever it is. Anyway, whoever is giving, you all have to decide who is going to present. I'm not going to be specific on it. It's good at least in a 10 in a group, at least 5 to be presented. If you think all 10 to be present, to present it, still is okay by me, as long as you can manage your time. Just because you don't present doesn't mean that you are not questionable. You will definitely be questioned, so that you need to know to defend your presentation, right? But the presentation needs to be very effectively done. So I leave it in your hands to decide how many to present. Either the entire 10 can do, or maybe at least 5 can do, or that you decide. But definitely not the one person presenting the whole thing. So minimum 5 to be involved in the presentation. Even 10 can do that as long as you can manage your time. But all need to be present when they are presenting it online. So I should have the access to every staff member, every student of the group whilst the presentation is on, with their
So we do.
cameras on.
So that means we don't have to submit the presentation today, is it?
No,
Earlier
no,
it was.
no, 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 no. I
Okay.
think there had been a confusion on that. You don't have to
Yes.
submit the PowerPoint today. You only
Okay.
have to submit the executive summary or the synopsis. PowerPoint and the full report can be submitted by next week.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir,
Welcome.
Mano here again. So that
Yeah.
synopsis, do you need the referencing? Because we didn't actually
No,
put the reference.
synopsis you don't have to,
Okay,
but the
right,
final
right.
report you have to.
Okay, right. Thank you.
So even the synopsis, you need to have the group names and that cover page coming. Huh?
We should have, no?
Yeah. All three you have to have.
Right. Then the photograph also required.
Yes. The cover page is the same for all three.
Okay, right.
Name, group number, topic, then the names of the participants with their photograph. right?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're
welcome.
Sam Hemal, Group 9.
Yes.
One more clarification. Is it we are free to add any graphics in the PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah.
With
You can do that.
You can do that.
And in the cover page, we have added the photograph and the name and the institution. That's all three. In the we have added the topic and the group number and the participants details. We add three things: the photo and name and the institution. Is that all? Or we need to add any identity card?
No need.
Okay.
That's all because if possible, yes, point. If possible, you give have you all been given an index number? I think your registration number is your index number. So give your registration number.
So we have already submitted it without adding index number. In the next two things we can add. Is it okay?
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I think I have not mentioned it, so I will do that connecting part.
Thank you, sir.
So, okay. So if there are no questions, we can wind up our sessions. So our lectures will be over from now. And for today, that's all. And I think the course is over, I think. You all have any more pending sessions by any other lecturers?
I think no, sir.
No, right. So that means, okay, this week, now next week you will submit it. So we will take up the presentations from the week after next. That means, I'll tell you.
17th.
So this is Darshana again from group number 6. Do we have to include the references in the PowerPoint as well?
No. No, but if you are using any diagrams or, the illustration and all, if you are bringing it from there, then you have to bring that. You have to give the source there.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Now today is the 3rd, right? So you are going to submit it by 10th. And we will have our presentation from 24th. Right? That's okay.
Okay, sir.
We'll have the presentation from 24th, so we might have to have it probably maybe over 3 days. It will go on for 3 days. It looks like 10 groups now. This batch is very large. So my request for you, come prepared. I will take a call which presentation I am going to get on a particular day, right? So I'll have to be prepared. Otherwise, if I go according to the sequence of the numbering, right? So that's going to be my choice. So I'll have to be ready by the first day itself, right? To make the presentation. So be ready. And the audience can also, after the Q&A time, I will give my comments and I'll open it out for the audience also to raise their questions, queries, doubts, so that the group who is making the presentation should be able to answer and clarify. These are learning exercise with certain part of marking built into the process. It's more kind of a learning exercise where now you see, if you go through the topics we have shared, all are very much relevant and connected to the compliance function, right? Either directly relevant and connected or indirectly very important to know. So the course content has no time, or rather the time allocated for the course has no time to discuss those areas. But in order to ensure that a good quality product is put out to the market as a diploma holder, we are bringing these concepts into this so that the knowledge you are going to gather is enormous. And also, you might get a question on certain topics that we have discussed. One question on that, or maybe part of few other questions on those also in your examination. So it's going to be material for your sit-down paper also. You might get or you might not get. Then certain years, there had been questions on the topics we have discussed, because it is discussed and it's been open to everybody within the class or the group. So the learning of those findings are also important. So you might get a question or part of the questions from the areas we are going to discuss under this topic. So pay your full focus and attention onto it, because it's definitely going to create lots of value into the product that you are going to put out. Right. So no questions once again. So okay, then I thank everybody for your very patience hearing and the cooperation. And so let's meet up with our presentations on 24th, no? First day will be 24th, and it will go on for about 3 days, if I think, as I guess right. Your presentation time will be around 25 to 30 minutes. Take that time to give to present what you have sort of identified and learned through the research, and it will benefit the rest also. Okay.
So there's another problem that when the exam is going to conduct.
Generally, you are given 2 weeks study leave, right? So now that the sessions are over today, practical sessions, you can reasonably assume the examination will be held in November. It will be early or mid-November, depending on the country situation, because they need to get the help. Now it's on a kind of improving trend. So be hopeful of sitting the exam in November. Okay. Anyway, the IBSL will make the final call on it, not me. Generally, I know that you are given minimum 2 weeks study leave. So, but the presentations on, I will recommend them not to have the examination in October. So they will have the examination in November, anytime in November or thereafter, depending on the country situation, health condition. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay.